want a garden so I can grow, and you can only go so far on your own.
So hi, I'm Lucy
I'm Gavin.
and we live in Permaculture Island on the Isle of Wight in Knighton. We have an off-grid setup here, growing our own food, which includes having animals.
Our own electricity supply, as in we predominantly use solar energy. We're not grid tied in any way, so we had to get kind of clever with where we have excess electricity, which obviously led to the pantry. We dug our own well, as we have our own water supply.
We've been here about 21 years now.
Yeah, 21 years. We started growing food a long time ago, and we did that in the traditional way for a couple of years, like, you know, typical kind of soil management, should we say, compost piles and growing all the annual crops that everyone knows. And we found that that was a lot of work to obviously, you know, grow, do all the successional plantings and the soil management. And slowly over the years we developed and moved towards a permaculture way using forest gardening, because essentially the perennial systems by far less work, and the management of the soils of using mulches are less work as well, you know, instead of sort of doing lots of composting, should we say. I'm not opposed to hard work, but I'm not a fan of unnecessary work. And so what I like to try and do with the site is actually design things in a very sustainable way, meaning that I want whatever I'm designing to self-regulate as much as possible. And so that would go for food supply, that would go for whether I was trying to arrange the animals, like for example the chicken cone. The pantry itself, you know, I'm going to build thermal mass and want that to kind of coast on itself for as long as possible. The greenhouse obviously does that. Our house does that. We build in thermal mass into the, you know, solar passive heating for our home. It just makes a lot more sense to design things properly, you know, in the first place, and they'll you know, they'll serve us in the long run.
Designing out the hard work.
Yeah.
My name's Jan. I've been coming here to Permaculture Island for about 10 years, something like that now. And it has changed quite a lot over time. And I think that's their secret weapon in a way, because part of the permaculture process is observing and being within nature and watching how things change and how things need to change to be responsive to whatever's going on. When I first came, they only had chickens. They didn't have other livestock at all. The garden, the bones of the garden was very much the same as it is at the moment, but the contents of the garden has changed and some structures around them have changed. For instance, they didn't have a greenhouse, the pod looked much different, the animal buildings looked much different. So it's kind of been smartened up over time as well. And part of that process has been the willingness and desire to share these sort of permaculture processes and how important both Gavin and Lucy think it is to be sustainable into the future with our food, our animal husbandry, and our pressure on ourselves and our pleasurable living as well. So over time, the puzzle to begin with was, how do we take this out to people? How do we get people interested? Because it does seem very niche to a lot of people, very alien, given how we're taught to garden, you know, dig down 2 spits and fill it in with stuff and then plant and then dig it all up again. It's a very different process. So Joe blogs down the road, how do you get them interested? So it's been interesting for me to watch how they've developed their educational program, as well as maintaining this as their home and their lifestyle. So there's no artifice here. It's as they are. What you see is what you get. And if something happens that doesn't work, they respond to it by saying, how could we do that better? And I think that's a magnificent example to share with the community. Also, of course, I mean, they rely on their mulching program to be able to keep this much land and growth going in a sustainable permaculture way. So the mulch bins down the bottom that invite the community to come in and put their garden chippings in the various bags keeps them going. That's great for the community, and it's great for Gavin and Lucy for their land. So it's a good cooperative arrangement, which Gavin has adopted a golf buggy to be able to load it up and chug it down to the bottom of the cliff down there or where it needs to go. Another example of being adaptive. And certainly the tours and the open days are good for general public to come in and start to ask questions. The more intensive tours are good for deeper answering of questions. How do you look after the chickens? How do you manage the goats? How do you manage when they have young? How do you get that to grow? How do you keep your garden watered? How do you do this and that? How do you get your electricity? How do you store your food? To more specific ones about how they bottle or process their produce so that they can feed themselves through the year, and how they make soap, how they look after themselves. So you've got several different educational programs that again have been responsive to what people have said they wanted. But certainly over the last 10 years or so, it's changed a lot, an awful lot. Where the animals are now, that was just beans. And for me, as a member of the public, if you like, even though I come here a lot as volunteer, I've been able to take that knowledge back to my garden and change my garden, and that has had a knock-on effect on my next door neighbours. So it begins to spread out and begins to grow. And I think really that's part of Gavin and Lucy's vision, that they want to share out what they've managed to achieve with very hard work, because they really believe in it. They believe permaculture as a way of life, not just as a growing stuff, has a lot of value, particularly in our changing times with our very interesting economy.